When Paul George first got to the 76ers, there was a lot of expectations that Philly could make a deep playoff run if Embiid, PG, and Maxey stayed healthy this year. Obviously, that did not happen. And what I didn't expect during Paul George's first season with the Sixers is for him to have a year where he hasn't even played better than Norman Powell, who was the sixth man for the Clippers and has inserted himself in the starting lineup and has been better than him all year long. And that was surprising to me because I thought at some point during this regular season, we're going to see a better version of Paul George. And that never happened. He was either injured, not playing good basketball. And we look back at Paul George back in his Indiana days. In his early years, we forget that he made back-to-back Eastern Conference Finals runs. Obviously, remember the play where Paul George had this moment.
Here comes George, got the step and stuffs one move and counts on the foul.
And after that dunk he had on Birdman, Paul George had a lot of promise. I mean, people were excited for him, especially when he had that dunk. He battled LeBron James and came back the next year. They went to another ECF, lost in 6. But you thought to yourself, Paul George is only 23 years old. Indiana is still an up-and-coming team. At some point, they could eventually break through. And then, of course, with Roy Hibbert, he just never lived up to the expectations that people thought he could eventually reach. Now, he wasn't bad, but I remember in the Hawks series back in 2014, he just wasn't that good. And it was hard for Indiana to overcome those deficiencies. And going forward, when they got to the year 2016, they weren't as good anymore. And Indiana had to figure out how they're going to build around Paul George at that point. Now, before the 2016-2017 season started, Paul George said this about Reggie Miller. I always look at weird stuff like that, like how close I am to this guy. So I would look up records, look up years he's played, scoring, how much points he put up for the Pacers. Where is he at? Where am I at? How far do I got? I'm into weird stuff like that. That's where I realize how big he was. It's the reason his number is retired here. So you think to yourself, okay, Paul George wants to end his career in Indiana or at least play for a long time here and really stamp his legacy for the Pacers. But fast forward to 2017 offseason, 8 days after the NBA draft, and Paul George wants out of Indiana, gets his wish, and gets traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder. He's made comments about, well, why don't the Pacers honor my achievements? And that has turned fans off because at one point you said you want to surpass Reggie Miller with the accolades in Indiana, but then a year later you leave and go to Oklahoma City. So that all happens. And then when Paul George ended up in OKC, it was awesome because he loved playing with Russell Westbrook. The 2019 season, he was unbelievable. He was playing at an MVP level. He was in those conversations. I mean, Paul George was fun to watch. But going to the playoffs, they got knocked on the first round in back-to-back years. Lost in 6 to the Jazz, and then lost in 5 games in Portland. And this was the last play of Paul George's career in OKC.
Lillard, long-range three, and it's good!
So you had all those disappointments up. And then what happens? He gets traded to the Clippers, and that whole trade if you look at this graphic here, it's just really bad because, as you see here, they absolutely fleeced the Clippers by having SGA, and now the Thunder are looking like a team soon to be a possible dynasty at some point with Chet, SGA, and Jalen Williams. So as you can see here, it hasn't worked out for Paul George, but you go to Philly. You talked about in the offseason how you wanted no trade clause with the Clippers, and people were wondering, like, why would you ask for that? Because you aren't available all the time. And certain players get that incentive. But it is what it is. He goes to Philly. And now there's reports that Paul George might get traded this offseason. So at this point, Paul George was phenomenal with Indiana. He had some really good years with OKC. But ever since then, there's not a lot of memorable moments about Paul George. And then he has this podcast. He goes on the air 3 weeks ago and talks about this.
Fellas, it's no secret. This season is up to this point, man, it hasn't been what we envisioned. I know my goal when I first signed with Philadelphia was to bring a championship to these amazing fans here. I still remain positive about that, and that is still the case and where I'm coming from. With that being said, though, I want to let the Podcast P family know that after today's episode with Dwight, I plan to take a break from the pod just to focus on getting my body right, getting mentally right, and, help this squad make a push towards our goal to finish the season out, give ourselves a chance to be in contentions to compete for a championship.
Good job. It's pretty funny to me that you want to stop podcasting for now. I think he did that because he probably realized that he has to play for his starting spot because the Sixers are tanking to remain in that top 5 draft spot. And they'll probably end up replacing Paul George. And that won't be a good look for him. So he probably just say, you know what, let me stop doing the podcast P and start really locking in and, trying to go after a playoff spot when Philly was just falling apart. Again, it's just not a good look for Paul George. And now I wonder if Philly can even trade him at this point. And will they even get any value out of that? Because his contract is huge. I don't think anybody wants to take on that type of money unless they're desperate. So where does that leave Philadelphia at this point? They're probably stuck with Paul George for the next 3 seasons. And it's definitely a rough situation going on.
I don't like where this is going.
And hopefully Paul George next year comes back and motivated, focused, because this has not played out very well for him. And if Philadelphia wants to trade him at some point, they got to at least give him some minutes next year because they got to rebuild his trade value and his image in the NBA. It's not good when you're out podcasting. Now, again, I have no problem with it. But like Rashad McCants said, if your game isn't better than your podcasting, it's like, well, what are you doing here? Now, I have no problem with you being on a podcast, but you probably don't want to be in the spotlight when you're not playing good basketball because fans are going to wonder, well, are you putting more work into this project than your actual game? Those are fair questions, whether you like it or not. But I just think Paul George is to come into next season and lock in. Play these 65 games, show up night in and night out. Don't have Norman Powell be better than you next season. Like, that's crazy to me. And it's not like Paul George is a bust or that he's not capable of being a great basketball player. There's even guys like Brandon Miller who said that Paul George is his GOAT. Kiyan Anthony has come out and said he loves Paul George. So it's not like people don't model their game after him. The problem is when you're not playing enough, when you're either load managing or missing basketball games, or when they need him to step up, especially in the playoffs, he's not always consistent. This is where you land. And it's a sad day. I mean, Paul George, fantastic player, but when you're not reliable and it seems like your podcast is doing better than your game, you're going to get this type of feedback. So hopefully he figures it out. He comes back next season and the Sixers just play better because they're at the lowest of lows right now. And you hope that the GM can turn this thing around, figure out how to get Embiid healthy, and the Sixers can make some type of playoff run sooner rather than later. Hope you guys enjoyed this video today. Love to hear feedback about Paul George being out for the rest of the season. Do you think he's killed his reputation, and do you think he'll ever rebound after what's happened in his first year with Philadelphia? Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.